right, welcome back to our podcast here at the Lighthouse Arabia. My name is Anna White. I will be your host today. I direct our corporate services here at the Lighthouse as well as our mental health first aid training. So today we're here to talk about a very interesting topic, I would say, that we can all relate to as well as all of our listeners, and that is pressure and performing under pressure. And what I always say is it really doesn't matter whether you're a parent or it's on the field, off the field, in the boardroom. We all respond to pressure in different ways. And I'm joined today by two of my wonderful colleagues, Managing Director of the Lighthouse Arabia, Dr. Robert Chandler, and also Dr. Scott Whitfield, who is a sports and exercise psychologist. So welcome. Scott, I'm going to start with you, and I know that you have recently joined from the UK, where you've worked with many elite athletes in the field. So I'd love to know what brought you here to the UAE, what brought you to the Lighthouse Arabia, and also, what is it exactly that you do for people that might not be familiar with your career?
Okay, thank you. Good to be here. I think what initiated me wanting to move to the UAE was the opportunity which I feel my skill set can add to what I believe is an initiative put forward by the government in UAE to really drive sports and really help sports, or help the UAE become recognised as a sporting hub. So I'm aware of the national sports strategy and the money and investment that's been put into really driving sport. As you said, I've worked as a sport and exercise psychologist in the UK for 3-4 years now, working with young athletes in academies who are aspiring to become elite athletes, as well as elite athletes who are, as we're going to talk about today, probably performing under pressure and really having to draw upon skills and strategies which enable them to reach peak or high performance.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And it's something that I'm quite familiar with, but I don't know the intrinsic details. So I'm excited to really hear some examples from you in some time. Dr. Robert, I'm going to move over to you. Now, under pressure and performing under pressure, I would say personally has been very glamorized in today's world, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's within schools or whatever, or maybe sometimes even at home, I could say. What is it really to be under pressure? And is it something that is a good thing, that we can use it to enhance our performance? Or is it kind of like stress, that something could spiral? I'm going to hand over to you on this one.
It's a great question, Anna, and what I would say, firstly, I think it's important to differentiate between the two concepts that you mentioned. Number one is pressure, and the second one is stress. Now, both of those things I think are intrinsically linked, but they are, phenomenologically different, I think. So if we think about pressure firstly, I like to think of pressure, and I explain it in this way to clients, as essentially a set of forces. Now, those forces can be external or internal. So external pressure may be the opinions of others, the noise from the crowd, the noise from the boardroom, the expectations from other people, the voice inside your head saying you're not performing at your best. So these are the sort of forces that create pressure, which I think is different to stress, which is how then you respond to that. And we know that stress is a physiological experience, but going back to the point that you mentioned, why do some people excel under pressure and others completely crumble? And it really is down to this idea of how well you manage stress, right? The second part of your question, is it good or bad? It's inherently neither, right? And we often in psychology talk about this inverted U theory of stress, which is the idea that there is an optimal level of stress at which you are likely to perform at a high level. But if you have too little stress, you're likely not to be motivated, you might be bored, you're essentially understimulated. Or it can go the other way, where too much stress causes you to crumble, freeze, or run away from the situation. So for every high performer, it's about what is that sweet spot in the middle of the inverted U that helps you to perform at your best.
Wow, I love that answer. Thank you for sharing. And Dr. Scott, I might go back to you. Any thoughts here? Any follow-up on what Dr. Robert has shared?
Yeah, I think naturally we experience stress, feel that pressure, and in a lot of cases people feel like it's something to get rid of, or it's a bad, whereas actually I think what Robbie's alluding to there, it's more how we interpret it. So there's a research paper which sticks in my head by a sports psychologist called David Fletcher in Loughborough, and the title of the research paper is not, or alludes to, not getting rid of the butterflies but getting them to fly in formation. And I think that the biggest takeaway for me coming out of that research paper was It's how you interpret that stress and that pressure, but how you then utilise coping strategies or skills to really facilitate your performance moving forward.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for sharing. And I think from my own perspective, working really closely with corporate teams here, I think there's a lot of myths out there. You know, people have the wrong idea. They think stress is bad. They think pressure is bad. They've either kind of labeled these things as performance enhancers or something that we really need to run away from. But when I often think about some of the common kind of strategies or tips that we hear of out there in the community, it's things like, you know, you just need to breathe. You just need to calm down. You need to visualize your safe space. And I guess I'd love to hear from each of you. Are they myths? Are they plasters that you put over something? Is it a short-term fix or is it a lasting remedy? What are your thoughts here, or what are some of those common myths that you would hear? Scott, I might jump to you first.
Yeah, I think those techniques or skills you mentioned there, so breathing techniques or relaxation techniques, I think they can be useful for some individuals in those moments. What I'm always cautious of is prescribing those skills and strategies and saying that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. The manner in which I work is helping to develop that individual self-awareness of actually what are my coping strategies or what are my resources and what really does help me in the moment. I need that experience of competing, but also having that awareness and that ability to reflect on what are my thoughts in this situation, how am I feeling, and is it impacting my performance? And once we've established that self-awareness and once we've begun to notice those thoughts and those feelings, we can then begin to build and begin to think about, okay, what is going to help me in that moment?
Yeah.
But yes, certainly I'd always be cautious to say you should try X or you should do this. It's more working, or for me, working collaboratively with the individual to really try and figure out what is helpful. And then it's probably a case of trying that in practice and in competition and coming away and using those metacognitive skills to really think about what did that help me, or do I need to tailor or change what I'm doing to really sort of facilitate what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, jumping in, Anna, you use the phrase calm down, and I think if we go back to what we were saying earlier about this inverted U theory, and what Scott is saying as well, is that everybody's strategies need to be very dependent on them, essentially, because actually for some performers they actually don't need to calm down, they actually need to get more stimulated in order to perform better under pressure. And ironically, you don't actually want to be calm when you're performing, as Scott was saying, and I thought that was a lovely analogy, this idea of you don't want to get rid of the butterflies, right? You need a certain level of stimulation, of arousal, but you need to have that in a regulated way. And yeah, sure, deep breathing might help for some people, but for some people not.
I really like that. I guess what I'm thinking of when I'm listening to both of you is really a personal reflection. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even how you reflect it when you go inwards. I often find that during busy times, and I would say this month is quite a busy time for us here in the clinic. We've lots of trainings on, we're doing lots of things with schools, our school partners, our corporate partners. And I can often find that it's chaotic. And this year I've kind of planned for the chaos. So I'm trying to, let it be a little bit of chaos, but do it in a healthy way. And when I reflect on it myself, I have my big strategies, my non-negotiables, my sleep, my nutrition, my hydration, my exercise. And then I have my in the moment meeting, my heart rate goes up, all of those things. So I often try and have the big things in place, long term, all day, every day, as many days as I can, and my short term things. I'd love to hear from a personal perspective from both of you. Dr. Robert, you're managing director here of the Lighthouse Arabia. Dr. Scott, you work with athletes, and I'm sure your job is very busy at times. What do you both do on a personal basis to look after your own kind of response to pressure? What are your go-to tools?
I think through doing this for a long time, I've learned a lot from my clients as well. And yes, I have the theory and the academic knowledge, as Dr. Scott does as well. But I think we also learn a lot from the individuals that we work with, and they actually teach us a lot about ourselves as leaders and our ability to perform under pressure. And as you know, I work with high-performing executives from the corporate world. I think for me it starts, and I will often start in this place with clients as well, and I don't particularly like the term because I think it's been hijacked by Instagram, but I think there is something about mindset. If I am a high performer, be it on the sports field, in the corporate space, in whatever role, I have, whether I realize it or not, I have signed up for that role. Okay, I have made a conscious decision that I want to enter into an industry or an environment that expects something from me. And so pressure is inevitable, right? And I think just starting every day with pressure is going to come today. I'm going to be forced maybe to make some difficult decisions today. I'm going to have some difficult conversations with people. I might need to stand in front of a very large audience and deliver a talk, as you do as well, Anna, and as does Dr. Scott. I've signed up for this and I welcome it. And I think when we can shift from, I don't want the pressure, I don't enjoy this, it's costing me too much, to, I welcome this, it's here and I will work with it. That sort of acceptance and that kind of acceptance and commitment therapy approach, I think, is super useful.
Yeah, because when I'm listening to you, Dr. Robert, I'm thinking of something. I'm a visual learner, and I'm thinking when I am really feeling the pressure, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I really do. I know that if I can just get through this week, I'm going on holidays this weekend, and I really am, by the way. I'm super excited about that. But I know I'll get through the week, and there's a point there where sometimes I feel like when that pressure is really boiling and it's too much, that end line can be a little bit blurred. And that's my personal wake up, like we've got to rearrange things a bit. Would you say that there is a breaking point for our listeners today? When would an individual know that this is too much, that it's actually not healthy for my body or my brain? What is that point?
I think it's hard to, and I don't want to sit on the fence here, it's hard to say, but it probably is individualized to that individual. So like we've spoken about already, how we interpret that pressure and that stress is going to be different depending on that individual's personality, their experiences in life already. And I think, again, as I spoke about before, in terms of self-awareness and really being attuned to your own thoughts and feelings and emotions, I think naturally as humans we can go through life just on autopilot, really checking in with ourselves in terms of how we're feeling. So I'd say that's massively important. Going back to your question previously, what I try to do personally when I know I've got upcoming stressful events or I feel under pressure is I try to anticipate them in advance. And I do this a lot with the athletes, almost planning ahead. Adam Peaty put something on LinkedIn or social media recently where he planned his roadmap in preparation for Paris 2024 Olympics. And that was something which really resonated with me in terms of anticipating what challenges or what pressure moments are likely to come ahead, and how can we manage those, how can we prepare for those so that when the time comes we feel like we have the resources or strategies in place to actually cope and thrive in those situations. And that's something which a young athlete springs to mind where we knew he had a competition in February this year, and my work was tailored towards, okay, how can we help you anticipate what some of the difficult moments are going to be in that competition across the next few months, so that when the time comes for you to compete, you feel prepared and you feel like you have those resources, you feel like you can manage those thoughts or uncomfortable feelings if or when they do arise.
Thank you. And I guess, Dr. Scott, I know that you work with adolescents, right? And I know, Dr. Roberts, you work with adults. And I'd love to know from a different lens, when we think about, high performance, when we think about pressure, how are those strategies or tools different according to different age groups? How would you say, Dr. Robert, that you would really kind of look at that from an adult perspective? And then, Dr. Scott, I might move on to you. Is it the same for children, for teenagers? Again, is it to do with the individual?
I mean, maybe if I talk you through broadly what the adult journey, and again, I can really just speak from the experience of high-performing individuals in the corporate space, but I think performance in the moment is overestimated in terms of it being a predictor of success. Now, that might sound a bit wordy, but what I'm saying is it's before what happens, the event, it's during the event, and it's after the event. And actually, maybe I bring this to life with a case example. So an ex-client of mine that I worked with a very long time ago, former military service, had come out, moved into a sort of very high-performing corporate job, worked his way up, had to frequently deliver presentations to boards, etc. But he had had an unfortunate event where he had fainted at one of these events. And so subsequently, entering into these sort of situations, he was fearful that he was going to faint again. It had become a conditioned response, right? So the work was not just about what do you do when you are in the boardroom. The work was about, right, let's firstly process the trauma associated with that critical event. And that was a long process, right? We then talked about the non-negotiables, Anna, that you mentioned. So he wasn't sleeping well, he wasn't staying hydrated, he wasn't taking care of his exercise, which made it more likely that he was going to get anxious and faint again. So we did all of that prep work, and that formed a significant part of the intervention. Now, we then moved on to the moment, which I think is like the glamorous stuff that everyone wants to know. What do I do when I'm stood at the batting crease, or what do I do when I'm delivering a presentation? And things there like visualization and imagery, imagining how the event is going to go, and not just sort of imagining the positive outcome, what can also go wrong, and playing that forward, things like that. Things like having grounding objects or strategies just to remain present in the moment. Things like having what we call an external focus of attention. So often particularly with things like public speaking, people will become internal focused. So they start focusing on the fact that their neck is turning red, for example, or they might be sweating profusely. No. And so what we're trying to do in the moment is turn that external focus. So as I'm speaking to you now, I'm focused on you and your reaction rather than how my voice sounds. So it's these kind of things in the moment. And then also what happens post the high performance event. So what worked well, what didn't, were there any quote unquote failures? So going through this process with an adult, and I guess when working with adults, and I'm interested to hear from Dr. Scott here, but because they have a fully developed brain, a fully developed prefrontal cortex, their ability to sort of integrate some of this stuff is maybe superior to that of a teen. But also the guys I work with are generally motivated to perform under pressure and will do whatever it takes to perform under pressure. So maybe that's different to a teenage sample, I don't know, where there may be less motivation. I'm interested.
I think the one thing I've noticed comparing working with adolescents and working with adults is with adolescents, a lot of them will actually be drawing upon strategies or skills without even realising, so it's very implicit, and it's only until we actually engage in a conversation and help them reflect on, so in this moment where you performed well, what was going on in your head, or how was you feeling? And it's only through adopting that solution focused approach that they only then begin to realise that, oh, actually, yeah, I do this, and this helps me, and this doesn't help me, and again, I come back to having that self-awareness, and what's fundamental for my approach to working is really trying to drive that self-awareness, because a lot of individuals actually do engage in problem-focused coping skills or emotion-focused coping strategies, which in certain contexts can be useful, and for me it's unearthing some of that and really driving it. And being honest, maybe there's some adults I've worked with who haven't even realised it. You can see it in their eyes. It's almost a light bulb moment that actually I did this and this helped me. And then it's okay, let's carry on using that moving forward. I think with a lot of individuals as well, it's similar to what Dr. Robbie was saying there. It's focusing on what you want to do rather than what you don't want to do. So I was working with a footballer, and in those high stress, high pressure situations, he was saying, don't mess up, or don't do this, and you question, is that facilitative to perform? Is that helpful? And he's saying, actually, no. And so instead of that, how can we reframe what you're saying into something which is more helpful? For him, that was directing himself during the game, using self-talk, noticing that in a dialogue to really drive, okay, what should I actually be doing here, and what do I want based on my game and what I'm good at?
You made me think, actually, Dr. Scott. So in the example I gave as well, I had, and maybe you've experienced something similar, but I think for any high performer, and this sounds really weird, you have to accept the paradox that you may fail in order to increase the likelihood that you will perform. So my client refused to faint. He said, I cannot faint. Whatever happens, I cannot faint. I cannot faint again. You have to be prepared that when you get up there, you might faint, but you'll survive. And as soon as you can accept that this may not go perfectly, but also know, like you were saying, Scott, with the reframing, I will be okay, I've got coping resources after, I'll pick myself up, it's not life or death, but you have to be prepared to fail in order to succeed.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's really playing it out. It's coming to terms with things that might actually happen, that might not happen, but also we're kind of more ready. And I guess when I'm listening to the differences between working with adults and working with a younger audience, it really makes me think about a lot of the work that we do here at the Lighthouse Arabia, Dr. Scott, which is really around parenting and parent coaching. And I guess my question for you is, I know that you work with, let's say, teenagers, you work with athletes, you work with teenagers that might need to perform, whether that's exams or in their, social lives or in their sport, on the sports field. But how important is it for a parent to also be mindful of how they respond to pressure? Like I often say to the parents that I work with, you are the thermostat. If you're high, every room in that house is going to be high. What about for the teens that you work with? Do you also need to work with those parents, or is it separate processes?
Yeah, I always say I adopt a systems-based approach, which is I recognise that we don't exist in a vacuum, but we're influenced by that whole social cultural environment which we are embedded in. And therefore, for me, working in a sporting environment in the UK, it was how can I support that athlete, but also then how can I work with the broader multidisciplinary team, the coaches, the nutritionist, the strength and conditioning coach, to think about what environment do we want to create here, and again, is that facilitative to high performance?
Yeah.
Personally, my own journey, my father was my coach as a young athlete, young kid playing football from 5 years old through to 18 years old, and it was only after I stopped playing that my dad really recognised the impact he'd had on me. I burnt out at 18 years old, and that's not because of my father, but he opened up and said he didn't really know how to support, but he could see how we were in a high performance environment, and maybe at a young age I didn't have the strategies or the skills to cope in those high pressure situations, which is the exact reason I became a sports psychologist, because it connects with my journey, and I want to help young individuals like me who maybe could do with some support.
Yeah.
I've gone off on a tangent there, so I need to ask
No,
a question.
it's good, but it actually brings me on nicely to my next question, which is, if there is parents listening here today, what is something that you would share with them? Like, what is it, if you are a parent of a teenager who's maybe an athlete, who's performing a lot, who, you can feel the pressure in your home, what is something that you would say to that parent? How do they walk the walk?
I always say, and I always ask parents when I'm talking to them, is what is your role within this? Why did you want your kid to play sport in the first case, and how do you want to support them? What are your values as a parent? Equally, I ask, what does your kid want from you? So an 8-year-old who is playing soccer or football or is a runner, for example, they probably participate in that sport for different reasons to a 16-year-old who has been playing the same sport for 8-9 years now, and maybe sees a career, and therefore as a parent it's probably recognising what type of support that they want and need from me, and everyone is different. So again, I think that's been a real theme of this conversation, is how individualized everyone is. But as the parent, and sometimes it might be tricky, but having that conversation with your child and asking them, what type of support do you want from me? Do they need you to just put your arm around the shoulder and be there for that emotional support? Or do they want informational advice? What springs to mind is an interview with Peter Schmeichel, who's an ex-Man United goalkeeper, and his son won the Premier League with Leicester, and he spoke about how they had that conversation and how, despite Peter Schmeichel being recognised as one of the best goalkeepers ever, he tries not to engage in a conversation with his son around how to perform as a goalkeeper and the technical elements of it. They've agreed that he's just there to offer support and be a listening ear, and therefore for you as a parent it's being conscious and having that open dialogue with your child in terms of what do they actually want from you and what type of support lands best. Now, if they're a young individual, they may not be able to articulate that, and so in the past I've used activities where we've done a traffic light system. So what do they want you to stop doing, what do they want you to continue doing, and just having those conversations enables you to really offer support which will land with them.
I really like that, thank you.
Yeah, I do as well, Scott, because you've got me thinking the self-awareness piece for the parent is huge, isn't it? It's about not how do I run on autopilot or how do I live out my dreams through my kid. It's what kind of parent do I want to be in this particular situation versus this one. And the example you gave of the Schmeichels, Peter Schmeichel had very deliberately said, I just want to be a dad to Casper, and I don't want to get into the technicality stuff. So I think the take home there for me anyway from what you've said is it's about us as parents thinking very deliberately, what's my role in relation to my child and their sporting endeavours?
100%.
And I guess this is true also for education. What sort of parent do I want to be when I'm coaching my child when it comes to academics?
Absolutely. And I think really understanding that, as parents or as coaches on the field, as managers, in the corporate space, a lot of these feelings and stress is really transferable in many ways. So I think there's different components of this. That's what I'm hearing from both of you. There's different components and each of them need to be tackled in very different ways. If you think about the sessions that both of you engage in with your clients, how do you think that some of those skills that you're working on can be translated back into other things? So let's say, for example, Dr. Scott, you have a student with you who's an athlete. You're working really on that performance within football with him, for example. How can some of the skills that you are supporting him build be transferred then into the school environment, for example?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because as you were talking there, something came to mind. So there's an individual I've worked with who's 16 years old, and what we've done a lot of is compare the schooling context to the sporting context. And as I said before, there are a lot of strategies or a lot of practices he puts into place when exams are upcoming. So anticipating, right, I know I've got an exam this day, I know I've got an exam this day, and it comes back to his preparation. So feeling prepared, feeling as though he's looked at the content and he's really covered all grounds and left no stone unturned in terms of what he needs to revise, gives him that feeling of confidence going into the exam.
Yeah.
And helps him cope under pressure in those high pressure situations. And then we translated that into a sporting context. And he was struggling in competitions or in moments where he perceived there was that pressure on his shoulders, whether that was induced from himself or teachers or parents who in conversations about the sporting competitions. And so we almost utilised what he's doing in a schooling context and said, how can we apply that to your sport? And again, a bit of a light bulb moment, and implicitly he was using all these strategies in terms of preparation for school. And once we then established actually being prepared, doing in a sporting context, my technical preparation, my tactical work, my gym work in the week will actually leave me feeling more confident on the weekend. And therefore, when I'm coming into those high pressure situations or racing on that big important race day, I feel more able, I feel like I have the resources and I put in the work to actually thrive and cope under pressure.
Yeah.
I think you raise an interesting point that made me also think of a counter argument, certainly that I've seen with my clients. I believe what Dr. Scott says, which is a lot of these skills are transferable, particularly for young people. But I think of a case of an individual who can stand up and deliver talks to tens of thousands of people on a stage, but then can't deliver his own wedding speech without having a panic attack. And this raises a really important point, which is I think high performers, one of the reasons they are high performers is because of their psychology, but also because of the amount of practice and skill they have. So it's competence.
Yeah.
And so if you are competent in a skill, you take confidence from that. But that's quite a narrow area or specialism of competence. And that competence doesn't necessarily always translate over to other environments. Now, you may have stress management or regulation skills that you can apply, but if I want to get really good at wedding speeches, I've got to marry a lot of people. But I've got to practice that skill over and over again because it's a different skill, even though it may look somewhat similar. And maybe, Dr. Scott, you may have worked with former professional athletes who have performed under significant pressure on the sports field, but then many struggle with life after that and transferring to a different career and performing in that career because they're not necessarily as competent in those skills. What do you think?
Yeah, something I've spent a lot of time or had a lot of conversations with athletes is that retirement piece and transitioning out of sport and them question, or even for myself as a young athlete, having spent 13, 14 years playing, going, well, I haven't made it, I haven't achieved my dreams in the cases, or some athletes I've worked with, they have. But I began to question, well, what has sport given me? Because was it a waste of time? And it's not, because there's a whole piece around using sport as a vehicle to teach life skills and promote positive youth development. So there are a lot of young individuals I work with, and again, they don't realise they're developing these skills around teamwork and resilience and leadership. And for me, I see my role as helping them recognize that and go, okay, well, if you're transitioning out of sport, what are the things you can take from this and apply into other contexts?
Absolutely. Because I think even if we look at the current research out there, we talk about this a lot with our corporate trainings, like advocates we have for leadership teams and champions, and even mental health first aid, where we talk about this level of resilience and being agile. And I think something that we often miss the ball on, especially as parents, is that we focus so much on IQ skills when actually the body of growing research is saying that EQ is actually completely outrunning, we could say, IQ when it comes to leadership, when it comes to university, when it comes to kind of that level of growth that we want to see often in our kids. So I think as a parent, but also as a clinician, it's important to understand the why behind why people come and see you, Dr. Scott, that it's not just on the field. It's not just because it's a difficult time, there's exams. It actually has that domino effect on all different areas of a child's life. And I think, Dr. Robert, you've already touched on that with adults that you work with as well. It's something that is intrinsically connected to every single thing that they do. And that is why we always say we're 3D beings. You know, we bring our whole selves to the football pitch. We bring our whole selves to the boardroom and to work, which I think is a really, really important skill. One thing that I would like to finish this lovely conversation, even though I would love to stay here for quite some time, I'll be under pressure then for my next meeting. I would like to know for our listeners from both of you, what would be a takeaway for people to consider who are listening here today about pressure and this idea of I've got to perform? How can they look after themselves when it comes to this level of pressure? Is it education? Is it tools? Is it therapy? What would one go-to tool or strategy or guidance be from both of you?
I would say that the starting point for me, and this is where I start a lot of conversations, is almost trying to learn from the past and asking questions of how do I naturally show up in high pressure situations, and notice those thoughts, notice those feelings that you experience. And it's obviously hard to think retrospectively, but how am I showing up in those high pressure situations, and is that how I want to show up? Is that facilitative to performance? And once we've established that ground, we can then begin to think, well, actually, what would be better for me? What is optimal? What do I want to be going on in my head? Am I preparing? And by asking these questions, we're driving that self-awareness, and we can then begin putting things into place to actually think about, well, if I'm experiencing this thought or experiencing this emotion, contrast that with what do I actually want to be thinking or feeling. Hopefully then we can begin the grounds to driving high performance.
Yeah,
that makes
I
sense.
hear
I don't
you.
think I've articulated that very well.
No, I hear you, Dr. Scott, and I think it's helpful for people to know. I would also say that a lot of people think they're very self-aware, and they're really not. I think it's around 75% of people actually are not self-aware. I could be wrong on that, but it's around that. Is there another way that people can really understand how they're responding to pressure? Is there any screening tools? Is it the case of asking your best friend or a colleague or a peer, in case people are just going with the flow on this treadmill of life and there's too much noise around? How is it that an individual would actually know that they might need some help and get that referral to you?
I think maybe feedback from others around you. So we talk about existing in an ecosystem, maybe getting feedback from colleagues, from peers, in terms of how they've seen you show up in certain situations. In a sporting context, I know everything is data driven. We have so much data to look at how we have performed in that context. I would throw caution to the wind there in terms of only evaluating yourself based on outcomes. And
that's a good point.
That's something, when you look at the definitions of what high performance is, some people characterize it or define it by what you achieve. So external achievements based on beating others or being stronger, faster, more efficient than others. Others characterize or define high performance by internal qualities and how you show up.
I love
now,
that.
my definition of what high performance is probably a blend of both, because if you only judge yourself based on what you achieved, then you may be going down a slippery slope there. Whereas if you judge yourself based on how well you're able to focus or maximize your energy or commitment to something, then we're probably on the road to high performance, and that's only going to lead to those outcomes and external achievements. And therefore, for an individual who wants to work towards high performance in sport, I wouldn't get solely caught up in how many runs or goals or wickets or what my score was in a test, for example, but dig a little bit deeper and go, did I give everything? Did I put in maximum effort? And therefore, by focusing on those controllable internal qualities,
got it.
I think that sets the precedent to actually achieve high performance.
Wonderful. So I'm thinking internal, intrinsic motivators there, but also maybe asking for feedback. Dr. Robert, is there anything that you'd add to that?
I think 3 things came to mind as you answered the question, and then Dr. Scott made me think as well. So I would just reiterate what I think I said earlier, or what I did say earlier, which is that I think every quote-unquote high performer needs to really interrogate their relationship with pressure. How do you relate to pressure? And pressure not being this set of forces that are negative, but how do I relate to pressure? And I think that's a task that you would do with somebody like Dr. Scott or myself. The second thought that comes to mind is suspense. You might need to cut that out. I think the second thought that comes to mind, and I will often get asked this in the consulting room, which is how do I perform better under pressure? What is the shortcut? And there is no shortcut for practice, right? So if you want to become a high performer in a sporting environment, or as a violinist, or as a rugby player, you have to practice for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. There is no Instagram post or ChatGPT conversation or conversation with me or Dr. Scott that is going to bring you up to a skill-based level just psychologically. And I think, and I see this a lot with sort of entry-level corporate people who want to be a high performer within a couple of months of being at a particular organisation. And I think there's something about, let's just have realistic expectations and how many hours you have worked thus far. It's unrealistic that you're going to be a super high performer within just a few weeks of entering this new work environment. So, yeah, sort of shifting your expectations, which I think relates to this idea of how do I relate to pressure and the pressure that I'm putting on myself. Can you remind me of the question? What was the question?
I think that you answered it.
Yeah.
I think what I'd add to that is, the importance of exposing yourself to those situations. You can put in all the practice in the world, and for me as a young athlete, I was the best trainer in practice because I didn't perceive any pressure. As soon as it got into a game or a trial at a professional club, for example, that's where I began to crack, and therefore it wasn't necessarily me. I was still showing up, but mentally I wasn't there. I was becoming avoidant and avoiding getting the ball and calling for the ball, and therefore it's showing up and approaching those situations, but then learning from them and putting things into place to actually develop and grow.
Yeah, exposure. And I think Scott raises a really important point, and I think I see this with corporate guys as well, ladies, men and women, is that you can do all the mental rehearsal, you can do all of the reading of your script of what you're going to say, but you need to be in front of audiences and be prepared to quote unquote fail or get it wrong, because those hundreds and hundreds of hours, you will get better, right? You will become a high performer, and you will, as we've said, seek feedback and regulate your nervous system, etc., etc. But exposure is critical in match days.
I love that. And it reminds me, just listening to you, of something that a young client said to me recently. And I said to her, conditioned to say, practice makes perfect. And she said, no, Anna, practice makes permanent. And it stuck with me. I also think it's important for our listeners, just a kind of maybe an end thought, that there isn't a destination that we're going to reach. Maybe we'll feel more confident and we'll be able to perform, but there isn't an A and a B. I think we've always got to work on that destination, that level of performance. At any stage it can change, at any time it can change. So it's this constant idea of, how am I going to develop my skills? How am I going to maintain that? And how am I going to change as my algorithm changes and I age as well? I will end with that thought. I want to say a big thank you to both of you. It's been really great. I feel under pressure to go and learn about this topic a lot more, but I really do appreciate it. Dr. Robert Chandler, Managing Director at the Lighthouse Arabia, and Dr. Scott Whitfield, Sports and Exercise Psychologist. Scott, how can people reach you if they would like to book an appointment?
So my contact details are on the Lighthouse Arabia website. I also have an Instagram, which is Dr. Scott Whitfield, so I'm contactable on there and through the Lighthouse website.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.